Zero. Hello, everyone. We are starting this session on board challenges on tackling the climate change in emerging markets. We are running this session as CGI Russia, the Russian chapter of the Climate Governance Initiative launched by the World Economic Forum. We are running this session with the support of our general partner in Russia, public companies BEAR, who are very active and leading the ESG and climate governance initiatives in Russia, setting very high standard for the whole financial sector in Russia. We are also supported by our strategic key partner, public company Polos, as well as Deloitte, DLA Piper, BBN Hills, Xerica, Business School Skolkovo, and London Stock Exchange Group. Today, I'm sure we will have a very fruitful and interesting discussion. And I would like to introduce our speakers today. The session will be moderated by Ayuna Nechaeva, London Stock Exchange Group, Head of Europe Primary Markets, Chair of Eurasia Market Advisory Group. I'm also joined here by Sylvia Dulinsky, World Economic Forum, Head of Business Engagement, Latin America. We are also joined today, and I'm very happy to welcome Alexander Vedyahin, First Deputy Chairman of the Executive Board of Public Companies BEAR, Fan Fu, CEO of China Pacific Insurance Company, Benedikt Sabotka, CEO of the Eurasian Resources Group. Unfortunately, Mr. Sabotka will be joining us later, but I'm sure he will make it on time, and we're looking forward for his thoughts and views on the topic we are discussing today. I'm also welcoming Tarsila Ursini, independent board member of Grupa Coring and AgriGalaxy SA. I'm also welcoming Silvia Stefini, non-executive independent director, Italgas. Our first speaker and my colleague is Sylvia Dulinsky. We will discuss the importance of integration of climate change into board's agenda and the role of climate governance initiative by the World Economic Forum. Sylvia, it is now over to you. Welcome to this panel, and I'm sure we will have a very interesting and fruitful discussion.
Dear Helena, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you all panelists for being here with us today. And thanks for the invitation to represent the World Economic Forum in this important discussion. I really want to commend the Russian chapter as one of the founding chapters of the Climate Governance Initiative, which is an initiative based on the principles for effective climate governance that were launched by the World Economic Forum in our annual meeting in Davos in 2019. And the Russian chapter is playing an important role driving this important discussion on the board challenges in addressing climate change in emerging markets, which have very different dynamics and economic structure, industrial and economic fabric, and different needs when we think about transitioning to a carbon neutral economy over the next few decades. It's really time to end the fallacy of this supposed inconsistency between sustainability and value creation for shareholders. We have countless examples of leading global companies that perfectly reconcile shareholder value creation with an ambitious agenda to adapt to a carbon neutral economy. And we more and more see that investors are turning their attention to how leadership in the boardroom is really a powerful agent for change in the way that companies truly reimagine their business in a net zero world. Without the support and actually beyond that, without a clear mandate from boards, the transition to more sustainable business models will not happen with the speed and with the determination that we need. For non-executive directors of all companies, be they financial, industrial, retails, consumer goods. This trend really presents a set of new challenges, and many directors are still not properly equipped to deal with them in the same way, as effectively as they deal with other more traditional board issues. And I think that's a core objective of the climate governance initiative. Because in practice, this means that few boards can today really can claim that they are approaching the subject of this transition with the same rigor, with the professionalism that they do to other more traditional core board functions. The topic of addressing climate change is typically owned by management and often lies outside of the non-executive director's comfort zone. Many directors really tend to downplay it, and as we see today here with some of these panels, that's fortunately by no means the case of all of them. But many directors really downplay it, saying that it's management's responsibility. Well, would they say the same thing about audit, about strategy, about risk management? So most emerging economies depend heavily on natural resources. As a consequence, their business have a lot at stake from this global transition to a net zero economy, which is, as we have seen the past few weeks and months, it's really picking more speed and accelerating and being more systemic. We must keep in mind that also, and this is very important, especially in emerging economies, that the vulnerable people in our countries are the ones who will endure the most severe disruptions in their lives because of climate change. And the transition to a carbon neutral economy will open many opportunities. There's no doubt about that, and it has been amply discussed. But it will also have significant economic and social costs, as whole industries will have to change their business and operating models. Therefore, it's important that as we focus on these opportunities that are being created, we also mitigate the costs for those people who risk being left behind, so that we can ensure what have been called a transition. And it's very important that we keep that in mind, especially in emerging economies. So I'm really glad to see today's panel with leaders from companies that are in the forefront of this process. And I'm sure this will be a fascinating exchange of insights. Thank you very much. And back to you, Elena, and our moderator, Ayuna.
Thank you very much, Silvio. It's a fantastic introduction, and I think it really sets the scene for the discussion today. I represent the London Stock Exchange Group, one of the partners for this event, and I can definitely say that a lot of what Silvio has said about really bringing the boards and the companies from the natural resources sectors, for example, on board is really crucial. Both SBER and Polis, that are key co-organizers of this event, are listed companies. They are listed on the London Stock Exchange. So I am delighted to also work together with you all to talk about the challenges facing boards of emerging markets companies when it comes to tackling climate change. Climate change has introduced new challenges of unprecedented scale to organizations around the world. Businesses are finding themselves under enormous pressure to align both their long-term vision and shorter-term strategy with highly ambitious targets to curb their greenhouse gas emissions. Implementing science-based targets requires mobilizing enormous resources as part of global corporate action. When it comes to historical natural resource-based economy, this transition carries deeper complexities for companies and their boards. Climate change has no borders. And it is therefore important at the start of today's discussion to recognize that we are all on this learning journey together. So as the global financial market infrastructure at the center of financial markets, London Stock Exchange Group, of course, has a key role to play to enable this transition to the low carbon future. I'll just very briefly mention some of the key issues that we're working on. So we're focusing on two pillars. One pillar is we're working with the stakeholders, with organizations and initiatives such as UN Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative. We are developing the model for climate-related disclosure that can be used by listed issuers as a guidance, and maybe later in the future as a core foundation for their disclosure. We work very closely with investors to ensure that there is a wealth of ESG focused and climate focused indices and products available, and of course things like transition bonds and sustainable bonds that are of course available for listed companies to ensure that we take them on this journey with us. So with that, I just wanted to focus on to move on to the discussion. As Yelena said, Benedikt Sobotka is joining a little bit later. I am just hearing that Alexander Vidyakin may be slightly late as well. So actually, we might start with you, Mr. Fu. Can I ask, please, the operator to display the panel so that I can see all of the panelists, please, because currently I think it's highlighted. Okay, that's much better. So, Mr. Fu, I apologize for jumping on you, so quickly with the question. I think the prior speaker is just being delayed, and maybe that actually makes a lot of sense, because CPIC is a company operating in one of the largest and fastest growing economies, and of course, we as a company also dual-listed, in China and on the London Stock Exchange. We're really delighted and privileged to have CPIC and you, Mr. Fu, with us today. So my first question to you will be, when did your company acquire the necessary know-how to tackle climate change at both executive and board levels?
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity and for your invitation, the CGI Russia, to attend this meeting. Pleasure to be here to share some of our practices and thinking ideas about tackling climate change. Now, of course, today is conference, so I'd like to say greetings to our friends in Russia, which I believe is in the afternoon, and some of our friends are in Brazil, which is in the morning. So I'm not sure whether I should say good afternoon or good morning, although we are in different time zones, but we are facing the same issue on the same earth, I guess. So we need to tackle climate or global warming. So you see, with the development of our society and the economy, CO2 are accelerating, emission are accelerating, which exacerbates global warming. So this higher frequency of natural disasters take a toll on both human life and economic development. So as an integral part of global climate governance, low carbon transitioning of emerging economies is also vital. So while we see a fast growing economy in China, the Chinese government paid a lot of attention to tackling climate change. In 2007, Chinese government floated China's national program for climate change. And the Chinese economy is shifting from a high-speed growth to high-quality growth, underscore the government's commitment to the low-carbon economy and the coordinated development of ecology and the economy. So China is making a lot of efforts for economic growth and its efforts to tackle climate change on the global side. Especially last year, at the 75th UN Assembly, China's President Xi Jinping announced China's target of striving to achieve a peak of CO2 emission by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2060. And also, we included the contents on ways to address climate change in the 14th National Development Program.
As a leading composite insurance group in China, we have a long history in green development. Given our strategy of staying focused on insurance and the pursuit of high-quality development, we see a lot of alignment with green development and the low-carbon transitioning. First, insurance companies can spread risks arising from climate change. Second, insurance companies may be adversely impacted by climate-related risks and need to fully consider such factors in pricing and risk management. Last, as a large institutional investor of long-term funds, insurers are well positioned to finance the national efforts in green transitioning. We have made a lot of exploratory efforts on such fronts. As a company listed in Shanghai, Hong Kong, and London, we set great store by ESG philosophies, including climate governance, with the board fully committed to shouldering the ultimate responsibilities. Based on our own realities, we have formulated the top-level design of ESG with the board as a top decision-making body of ESG matters. Under the board, there is a strategic and investment decision-making and ESG committee, playing a central role in ESG management. At the operational level, we have set up a dedicated ESG office which coordinates ESG efforts cross-functional departments and subsidiaries to ensure effective implementation across the entire organization. In the last 2 years, we have been putting in more resources and taking a host of steps to cope with climate change, such as the launch of insurance products to mitigate climate change, enhancing risk management in climate change, advocating low-carbon workplace and lifestyles, and stepping up cooperation with third parties in climate change. Going forward, we will put forward our own targets in carbon neutrality, and we will continue with R&D and innovation of sustainable insurance products. I think today's forum is a great opportunity to learn from you so that you can also help us to make more transition to green and responsible investment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fu. And this is, I think, the way you outlined your strategy is really fantastic. So you talked about the government strategy overall, the country's approach, you know, and talking about China's participation in the global discussions and the country's efforts. And then you talked about your products and how you as insurer also focused on providing sustainable products and also insurance for risk management. And of course, it's very important for yourself and how, you know, how your company also implements the ESG and climate change strategy at the executive and operational level. So this is really fantastic and really inspirational. Thank you so much. And I would like to also go back to Alexander Vedyakhin, who is the Deputy Chairman of the Executive Board of Sberbank. And Alexander, welcome to our event. We're really privileged to have you. I know you're extremely busy, and but your views are going to be invaluable to us and to our audience. And I wanted, my question for you is around your vision of the topic of climate change. How does Sberbank view it? And from your perspective, what are some of the complexities and opportunities that climate change presents to your board?
Good afternoon, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, colleagues. Thank you very much for the question. Actually, Russia is taking this topic really, really seriously. And it's known, for example, that the number of natural hazards in the country has doubled over the past 20 years. So it's really, really important for Russia to be also in the agenda of climate agenda, so to say. And by the way, Russia is one of the countries where global warming is the highest. Rate of warming in Russia is 2 times higher than in the world average. Especially bad for our north parts in Russia. It's a problem for engineering and for gas and oil especially. Over 30 years, for example, the average January temperature in Moscow has risen by 2 degrees. And I remember when I was a child, I used to play ice hockey outside on the street, so to say. Now it's absolutely impossible. No in Moscow, almost neither in Russia. It's a big topic for us, and decarbonization is accelerating in all sectors, and all investors view the companies that provides ESG-based solutions as more competitive. Actually, we are one of this company, and so from one hand side, we have our investor that's asking from us to start ESG transformation and to start green transformation, and that's what we have already started. So Sberbank is now in the process of ESG transformation and green transformation, so to say. And we have announced that Sberbank will be carbon neutral in the scope 1 and in scope 2. And we are talking nowadays when we will be carbon neutral in scope 3. So you can imagine that scope 3 for banks is the most difficult part, because it's about all our clients, I mean also credit clients and our corporate business. But to be carbon neutral in 2030 is we are the first bank, and I think the first entity in Russia that's put such targets for ourselves. And we can see that actually, for sure, we have a long way to go, but to transform our economy to a low carbon economy. But you know that we have a lot of oil and gas in structure of our economy. But I think those changes will be the most sweeping changes in Russian economy since the Soviet industrialization in 1920s and 1930s. So this is really about another type of economy that I think we will go to. As a bank, we are actively involved in the Central Bank of Russia assessment of the climate change risks and the impact of the introduction of a cross-border carbon tax on the Russian economy. And we did the same work to assess our own risks. And in addition, we evaluated possible scenarios for the decarbonization of the Russian economy and in accordance with the Paris agreements. We have finally come to a conclusion that transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources and the fall in demand for carbon-intensive exports could result in a quite considerable loss for Russian exports. And this is also a really important part of this agenda for us, I mean for Russia and for Sberbank, because we are proxy to Russian economy. So it's a big challenge for us as well, I mean in the carbon neutral agenda. But we now think what we could provide for our clients, and we're thinking together with clients, we're making such think tanks, what we will do to avoid such kind of damages. I mean to go in the hydrogen to be more green and so on and so on. But we have to understand that we have a lot of regions where coal and mine are the biggest part of local economy. So ESG is not only about E, but also about S. I mean, social impact we have only to take into account. I think, Ayuna, I have a bit, at least partially answered your question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think you've given us a really comprehensive answer to the question. I think, hearing about, the level of climate change that's currently, we're witnessing in Russia, that's quite alarming. But of course, a lot needs to be done. And as you rightly said, it actually falls on all of the stakeholders and the companies and the probably the leading businesses such as Sberbank that are the proxy for the economy of Russia to really provide thought leadership and lead by example from that perspective. So congratulations on your goal for becoming carbon neutral by 2030. I think that's a really ambitious goal, and I think one of the and I appreciate how hard it's going to be for a financial institution of your size and complexity to achieve that. I also agree with you that it's not just about the environment; it's about the social impact. And a lot of the leading companies, including, for example, Polus and a lot of other metals and mining and oil and gas companies in Russia, they actually provide systemic support for towns and villages across Russia, and that needs to be taken into account. We can't just sort of change things overnight. So thank you very much. That's been really valuable. So my next question will be turning to Tarsila Ursini, an independent board member on the boards of Grupo Corin and AgroGalaxy SA. So Tarsila, it is really hard to overstate the important role that independent directors play in holding companies accountable and driving positive changes at the board level. So in your experience, do boards appoint non-executive directors or specific sustainability ESG committees that are tasked with driving board deliberations on climate governance?
Well, first of all, good morning or good afternoon to everyone. That is a pleasure and honor to be here with you on this such important panel. So I thank TGI Russia team. Thank you, Elena, Silvio, Dulinsky, Ayuna for this invitation. Well, Ayuna, your great question brings me 3 points. First, I think is the great importance of climate change education for all board members, as this is the biggest challenge of the decade. So I believe that we don't need to be all experts, but it's essential to understand the strategic context and know how to do the right questions and to make the best decisions that really creates value over the long run. So it's why this initiative, Chapter 0 and Climate Governance Initiative is so relevant globally. Just that we have today the fundamental issue of digital transformation, technology innovation, ESG, and of course, climate change are now fundamental for companies to operate in the coming decades, and especially for developing economies as well, as Sylvia already mentioned. I believe that non-executive directors today no longer question the importance of issue of climate change. They want to be trained, they want to know how to do it, what this implies in management of my company assets, risks, and opportunities. At least I don't see deniers, explicitly deniers in the boards I served. However, my second point is, due to the urgency and the complexity of this agenda, I also believe that it's important to have experts and experienced people sitting on the boards right now. I think there is a bridge between understanding the importance, but actually bringing this in the context of our board's decision and day by day. It's a super challenge to incorporate climate emergencies in the daily business decisions. One thing is to understand the importance, the value the science. Another thing is what I do with this information in every routine decision on the board, whether it's strategy, audit, risk management, decision of new acquisitions, sales of operations, compensations of executives, program development, enhancing human capital, quarterly reports and results, innovation, development of new products, service. Well, all of this must take into account the issue of climate governance and management. So my third point, I do believe specific board committees can be an excellent and fastest way to embed this agenda. There is, in Brazil, we have a survey promoted by KPMG every year called the Corporate Governance and the Capital Market. And in this research, committees dedicated to ESG topic appear among the most common committees right now. But even though it's present in less than 10% of the listed companies surveyed, out of almost 400 companies surveyed. So we still have a way to go, but I believe it's rapidly changing. So I think when you have a specific committee, board committee, dedicated to this, you have ensure that the topic has effective importance on the agenda of the board. So I've been working with sustainability strategy for over 2 decades. And 9 years ago, I received my first invitation to act as an independent board member in a publicly listed company. I was a leader in products for civil constructions here in the country. It was very new at that time to have a specific committee dedicated to that. But the results were incredible. We changed the expansion, the risk matrix, with the ESG aspect. We have graded maturity in the integrated reports, are changing the profile of the free float investors. So we at that moment, we had approximately 70% of short-term investors on the free float, and we changed the profile to long-term investors, mainly because ESG and climate strategy. So we start to use biomass power generation for internal use, culture of innovation. We start to diversify business, and we inaugurated, for example, the largest dissolving pulp factory in the world for textile. It's a forest base. So we have expanded also the connection with retention and attraction of talents, et cetera, et cetera. However, I think from my personal experience, there are some fundamental factors for these specific committees to be effective. I think it's important to be led by a board member, a non-executive director, and preferable an independent and expert. I think also this committee must be from the company, not from the sustainability area. And must promote cultural change in all departments of the company. So we have to put strategy, finance, investor relations, human resource, compliance, risk, innovation, purchasing, commercial. So with a broad and fundamental agenda for the CEOs and the company's leaders. So this is my point on your first question. Thank you.
Thank you, Tarsila. Couldn't agree more. Let me then bring in Silvia Stefini, who is the non-executive independent director of Italgas and Falck Renewables, and also a member of the steering committee of the Chapter Zero Italy. So Silvia, I'm sure you will agree with a lot that Tarsila has said. Would you like to add anything else from your perspective? What are some of the roles of the chairman and the non-executive directors in the area of sustainability?
Yeah, I'm really impressed by the dialogue, and in particular by the fact there are so many commonalities across the countries and the regions. So there's a lot of things in common on the way we approach climate change. I'd like to add some more details because I agree on everything that Tarsila said and that I also heard from the other colleagues earlier. And I brought up just some specific examples to show how the dynamics will work in Europe. Those are examples from Italian companies listed to Italian Stock Exchange, but are really similar in Western Europe. It's a lot of it is driven by the European Commission regulation and behaviors. So the board is clearly in charge of the strategy of the company, and in this respect, it has to include any aspect that is material to the strategy and to some of the key processes. So the way the board really acts on climate change is through a lot of detailed work at the committees level. Now, in the board discussion, there are the summaries of the work that is done at the committees level. And the work at the committees level can be very detailed, especially on the large companies. There are groups that work closely with the management team. Clearly, the management team is the one who drives the analytics and a lot of the work, and the commitment of the CEO is extremely important to drive the change. You know? But the non-executive directors have an important role in accelerate the change, but also they have to validate the strategy and make sure that the processes are appropriately covered. So some examples, one started with the reporting. So the disclosure on climate and in general on ESG matters is becoming mandatory for large companies. In particular, what committees do is they have to review that the way the reporting is done is consistent with the strategy, is consistent with the materiality of the topic that are addressed and disclosed. It's also consistent with the standards, and there are a lot of standards that can be used, but the calculation, the measurement needs to be accurate. There needs to be solid processes, and also the evaluation of the assets. I mean, all the process of impairment needs to be validated. So those are typically aspects that are taken care of by the audit committee or the risk committee. Then we move to risk management, risk and opportunities management, because the risk committee will look at risk frameworks, understanding what are the aspects of climate that impact the company, and also how the company impact the climate. I'm thinking about, for example, including the physical damages, how they can impact, for example, manufacturing sites, or just the business model, or the supply chain, the distribution channel. A lot of way the committee's work is going in detail through the different business processes and trying to think about what can impact, what can go wrong due to climate change. But on the other hand, there are also opportunities that can open up because of climate change. So for example, introducing new products. One important element is to be able to measure the impact of climate. So understanding what are the key metrics on, for example, emissions, how they can be really, in a very detailed way, how can they be measured, and how can this be translated into a target at the company level and each business unit level. So this will be, a big task for the risk committee working with the management team. Planning is a strategic planning is a critical task for the board. And one element where I see an important role from the non-executive director and the chairman is to drive more and more the dialogue to the long term. Clearly, climate change has a long-term impact. And a lot of the business planning was done in like 3 years, but we don't see the changes of climate necessarily all in 3 years. So there has to be a dialogue with sensitivity analysis and with scenario analysis that brings the board discussion to a longer term horizon. And some of the discussion will also imply changes in the business model. This is the difficult part of the discussion. I think that the non-executive directors should, promote discussions about how the business model could change. Typically, non-executive director comes with different perspectives, so they can really enter into a dialogue and stimulate discussion about taking new opportunities, new businesses. Clearly, it's not an easy discussion. It requires time, but it's something very, very important to do. One element that is newer, but is becoming very important, is also the impact on the remuneration policy. There has been a recent EU directives, which has been also incorporated in some of the local regulation, including the Italian one, by which remuneration needs to be approved by shareholders, and a lot of details need to be disclosed in terms of remuneration. And it's becoming more and more common to have ESG parameters included in the remuneration of the CEO and of the strategic management of the company. And this is actually quite difficult because having targeted within the company is important, but translated into remuneration is really not straightforward because the measure needs to be auditable and credible over time, and also they needs to be done in a way that they challenge the management team towards certain behaviors. So some examples would be like on emission levels; those are actually very frequent. But there are also other measures that are used in terms of waste efficiency, for example, the use of resources. And one common way is to use the inclusion on the climate-related indexes, like the CDP index, for example, or other sustainability indexes, which by themselves, those are done by rating agencies that are very detailed, and they look through different processes. So there are different ways of this is included, still at a very early stage, but encouraging. So just to summarize, I think it's increasingly important for board members. Clearly, I hear what Tarsila is saying in terms of education that board members need to receive is clearly something that is ongoing, and it's coming from different areas. So there are opportunity to get informed. And I think that the investors community is also expecting a much higher level of competencies on these matters from the directors. One last comment maybe I want to make is that when I think about some of these companies, the ones that are most advanced in this topic and on these processes, they're really global players. So even if the headquarters are in Europe or in Italy, they play across the board. They have the two largest companies in Italy have major operations in emerging markets, in particular in Brazil and in Russia and other markets. And what happens at the headquarter level clearly impact all operations. So there is something that global companies, multinational companies drive across the board that is very important, I think, to make consistency about everything that we do. So.
Thank you, Sylvia. And you have presented this in a really structured way, across 4 pillars, disclosure, risk management, reporting, remuneration. And I wanted to touch on, and actually thank you for mentioning FTSE for Good, which is the London Stock Exchange Group's sustainability focused index. And we have a number of big Russian companies that are part of this index, such as Polus and Polymetal. So definitely I would agree with actually all of what you said. And also you've touched on the topic of remuneration, how tricky it is to actually tie remuneration to climate-related goals for the management. So with that in mind, I actually wanted to turn to Alexander Vidyakin and Fan Fu and actually ask you a couple of questions, and feel free to choose one or to focus on a specific aspect. So Alexander, what is the key challenge for the boards that aim to embed climate considerations into strategy, risk management and disclosure, and with maybe talking about things like remuneration, things like accountability, and things like how do you measure the outcomes? And then what is the impact of supply chain decarbonization on your companies? So for example, for Sberbank financial institution and for insurance companies such as CPIC. So maybe I will start with you, Alexander.
Thank you. Actually, I fully agree with Sylvia. First of all, the involvement of CEO is the key issue of the CEO and of the chief of board of directors. When those two key persons are in, you can start carbon neutral program and all such kind of things. When the CEO and the chief of board of directors are not in or didn't buy the idea, so no chance. So this is the first. The second, about remuneration, for example, for our executive board. So by the way, our CEO is the big ambassador of the Green Agenda, Mr. Gref. So, and our chief of supervisory board, board of directors is also really keen on. He's the Minister of Finance of Russian Federation, and we have partially almost one half of our board of directors is government of Russian Federation, and they are really hands on this agenda and pushing us actually to go faster. So about remuneration policy, we have decided to put green targets and ESG targets, to say it a bit more broadly, in our KPIs for this year. It means that every executive board member and every head of department in the end of the year, when we will have happy bonus time, will be measured by not only by business metrics as usual, but also by ESG metrics. That's for the first time we do. And because of this, because of this for sure, we have a lot of activities from our colleagues on the board, I mean the executive board, and from our all departments, rushing this to achieve these KPIs, to achieve these targets. About international ratings, we have ratings, and we will improve these ratings. And you talked about clients, and I think when I could talk about issues that we didn't solve, this is first of all decarbonization of our clients. So, for example, imagine we have oil refineries in our credit portfolio. Those credits are really long-lasting credits. And we can't say, okay, guys, you know, this is a green agenda, give money back. So it's almost impossible. So no chance. So for sure we will, and we do actually a lot of credits for green energy. So for example, for new energy, for financial instruments based on ratings based on ESG ratings. So we do financial instruments based on green energy. So we do a lot of, but for coal and oil, this is a question we don't know nowadays what to answer. I think we will move together with our clients to new industrialization. For example, gas could be, we can talk also about hydrogen. And I think, by the way, for Russia, hydrogen could be a key export goods in 20 years, for example. Yes, we can make, by the way, green hydrogen, and it would be a good opportunity for our economy. To move together with our clients to these ideas and to give money to improve and to invent actually those technologies. This is one of our key goals. And by the way, about remuneration is also one of the KPIs we have to help our clients to move to the green. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander, and thank you for the tip about hydrogen. So we need to start making our investment now. No, this is not investment advice. Please, please ignore. But you're absolutely right. It's about. It's not just about what Sberbank does as a company, but also how do you incentivize your clients, right? And how you can't just cut off the clients. You need to ensure that that you provide the necessary support as an organization to them. And I think in the area of natural resources I think a lot also is focused. There is a lot of focus on technology. How do we do what we do, but in a better way, in a more sustainable way? So I think technology plays a really big role in that. Thank you. Mr. Fu, from your perspective, what are the biggest challenges for you? And do you have, is there an impact on supply chain decarbonization from your perspective?
Thank you, Arina. That was a very good question. I agree with what Alexander has said. To put the climate change KPI into our risk management and strategic management and disclosure is important. In fact, this not only needs the board's attention, it also needs the synergy from all the company. First of all, from the strategy formation, we need to think about the risks. For example, we need to add details to the part of our ESG standards, which are related to climate change, setting realistic targets instead of merely making general statements, more in-depth analysis of potential impact of climate change on insurance companies, including both assets and liabilities. Further definition of division of responsibilities between risk management, product development, investment management, and CSR in addressing climate change so as to enhance the effectiveness of relevant work. In risk management area, there are many things insurance companies can do. Insurance coverage of climate-related risks is still very limited. And in the past decade, only 30% of the losses caused by weather-related catastrophes were covered by insurance. As for physical risks, insurance against extreme weather events and natural disasters may need to extra premiums and increase in claims payouts in the short term. When it comes to transitioning risk, there are both opportunities and challenges, as low carbon transitioning may lead to lower income from high carbon business, but this may trigger needs for new risk management. As mentioned by Alexander, for these energy intensive traditional companies, they cannot shift to new energy right away. So there will be new risk management needs. In recent years, we have been providing risk protection to the supply chain of green shipping and paper making, supporting low carbon transitioning of industrial energy mix. In clean energy, such as maritime wind power, we have achieved leadership in the domestic market, putting in place risk management standards for clean energy with our own characteristics. By the end of 2020, we have provided environmental protection liability insurance to over 4,360 firms. That being said, computing of climate-related risk can be highly complicated and fast-changing, and insurers may face challenges, including unexpected huge losses from extreme weather events. The impact of climate change may grow in a non-linear manner. The chain reaction of climate change may trigger systemic risks. All this call for forward-looking and systemic study of insurers when conducting business and increasing use of new technology in management of specialty risks. In information disclosure, as a public company listed in Shanghai, Hong Kong, and London, we're committed to improving transparency. The three listing venues have different rules, and their investors may also have different focuses. In reality, we have strived to balance between needs of investment from different venues, voluntarily disclose more information while ensuring full compliance with regulatory requirements of the three venues. For example, in the 2020 annual reports, we added a special chapter on ESG, and we look forward to London Stock Exchange and other institutions to give us more guidance in this area. And in fact, For financial institutions and insurance companies, the emission of supply chain far outweigh those from direct business activity. Therefore, decarbonization of supply chain requires close cooperation along the entire supply chain with shared vision and targets to ensure meaningful progress in climate action and net zero plan. On the one hand, we continue to optimize coordination with suppliers, helping them enhance climate governance capabilities. When granting suppliers access, we give priority to those with green and energy-saving products and set requirements for green credentials and qualifications for those sectors with substantial environmental impact, such as furniture, automobiles, property management, and printing. When identifying and avoiding suppliers with substandard records. In selection of suppliers, environmental requirements are part of the prerequisites for bidding and a factor duly considered in selection, with identification and early warning of potential risks. We have annual meetings of suppliers to communicate on our environmental policies. On the other hand, we vigorously push for low carbon transitioning of firm along the supply chain. Develop green insurance products, and our environmental protection liability insurance has incorporated enterprises' environmental risk evaluation into the pricing regime, which would grant a score based on the risk sources, environmental sensitivity, environmental management system, track record, environmental pollution of the insured. The score will be applied in pricing factors and other things for firms to promote decarbonization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fu. You mentioned quite a few things, but I think what I loved hearing about is the realistic targets. And I think, Sylvia, you mentioned before that science-based targets, and also the synergies between the financial institutions, insurance companies that actually make up vast parts of the global economy, and how they actually need to collaborate with the real economy companies, and also systemic risks. And of course, climate change leads to systemic risks, and also things like natural disasters, etc. So insurance and risk management around that is hugely important. So I wanted to ask, actually, Tarsila, do you have anything to add from that perspective? Have you had any comments bubble up while you were listening to Alexander and to Mr. Fu?
Well, you know, as Sylvia said, it's very interesting to be here in this panel because we have so much in common. So as I hear my colleagues here, I also believe that in Brazil we have similar situations and also challenges. As Sylvia said, we have here, for example, also for the next year we'll be obliged, we enforce to listed companies to disclosure parameters on remuneration policies and also on materiality aspect, risk management in respect to ESG. So a lot of things going on in the country. In respect to metrics, I served today in 4 different councils in different sectors: agribusiness, logistics, civil construction, financial markets. Everyone has a strategic climate agenda, public committees, tailored to each sector, some much more mature, others less. But there is one example that I can tell here is Movida Rent-A-Car. So Movida is a public listed company. When I joined the board 3 years ago, they already had 93% of flex vehicles, where you can choose gasoline or sugarcane ethanol instead of gasoline, which is widely used in the country. They had also an option carbon offset program for clients. They have a partnership with a native tree planting organization, very well known in the country. They have a very engaged and innovative CEO as Alexander and Sylvia said, it's very, very important to bring this agenda. And also arrived a third generation shareholder as a board member, who is also very engaged in social environmental causes. However, when we started there, we didn't see a climate strategy there. So we started to ask in the board, do we have one? Do we have a robust carbon inventory, scope 1, 2, or 3 audit with science-based target, as Sylvia said? How do we see the future of the whole of mobility and the company connection with other modes such as electric bicycle, buses, trains, or changing consumer behavior by renting vehicles on a monthly basis? We start to talk about a business model also. As Sylvia said, it's a difficult issue, but we started to talk about that. So we started to ask, are we a rent-a-car or a mobility company? So after all of that, we also started to ask how we can add intelligent artificial and data science to use to promote better solutions and products that are based off the pyramids that suffer so much lack of mobility in Brazil. So given those questions, which were very acceptable for all, the first things that we did, we invited the greatest specialist on subject in the country to present a lecture to the entire company leadership. So it was remarkable, and everyone left very confident there is a tsunami was coming, and we wanted to come out ahead as a group. And so we also decided at that period that we wanted to lead this vision in company, in the business. We made a commitment also to become a B Corp. So for this global movement of companies that pledge to be better for the world. So certified B companies meet a high standard of metrics, verifiable and comparable social environmental aspects, transparency, accountability. And then we started the ESG committee, board committee. So with 2 board members, with the CEO participating, the sustainability manager, the CFO, and human resource director, all actively participating in this monthly committee. So here the company started to structure a short, medium, and long-term climate strategy. We made a complete carbon inventory audited by third party. And we are continuing learning, but it's a very serious and transparent. So we define 3 main spheres: mitigation, so actions focus on the reduce of GHG emissions; compensation, with actions to offset the emissions that we could not avoid in operational process still. And third, adaptation, so actions to manage climate risk considering different climate sections. So in respect to mitigation, the overall goal is to reduce our emissions by 50% in the first 5 years and 30% by 2030. And here mitigation, I also highlight not only the scope 1, our direct emission, scope 2, indirect emissions related to use of energy, but also, as Mr. Alexander said, we also have a scope 3 commitment, which represents 98% of the company's total emissions.
That's really
so it's
fantastic.
The first company.
Yeah. Thank you, Tarsila. So I might pause you here, actually, because you've given us a lot of information to absorb, but I also can see that Benedikt Sobotka, the CEO of Eurasian Resources Group, has joined us. Benedikt, hello and welcome. And I know that you were delayed by a really important engagement. But anyway, you're with us now, and I wanted to jump right in with a question. How are climate considerations impacting your board's strategic decisions, Benedikt? And within ERG, who is responsible for ensuring that board decisions in this area are actually turned into real deliverables?
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you hear me well?
Yes, all great.
Excellent, thank you. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the World Economic Forum and in particular Sberbank, our great friends at Sberbank, for this great forum. Thank you for your support. I think Sberbank in particular has done a fantastic job in shaping the global agenda and the global discussion around ESG, not just in CIS, but globally. I remember some of the appearances of German Gref, whether it's at the Economic Forum in St. Petersburg or also in Davos. I think he's been one of the earliest to really push this agenda before other people haven't even started to talk about it. And for us as a big commodities company with 80,000 people around the world in 15 countries, of course, ESG has to be at our DNA, because we are very much in the communities where we operate in. We're very much integrated. We're of critical relevance to the system, whether these are the stakeholders around us, hospitals, schools, electricity supply, and so on. So for us, it has to be part of our NDA. Now, we didn't always call it ESG. I think today this is it's a great way to pull together different aspects, and of course climate change and CO2 emissions is an incredibly important part of this. We have actually made it a top priority to reduce carbon emissions. We have our own ESG committee, like most of our companies, but we find that what corporate and commercial organizations are best at is actually to translate a quantitative target into a business opportunity, because that only that will actually drive change in corporations. It's not, you don't want ESG and carbon footprint emissions to be just driven by a function that's responsible for HSE and ESG, but you want it to be ingrained as part of your business. So for us, this means we want to have all our international assets in the future, for example, to run on renewable energy. That's wind energy in Brazil in that case, and it's hydropower in Africa, and we're working very hard on wind energy and other renewable energy systems for our Central Asian operations. So CO2 reduction for us comes through changing the way that we produce the energy that we need to produce the products that we then sell to other customers. And the second is we're focusing more on products now that are actually critical for the low carbon economy, and that's in particular cobalt and copper. We think those are some of the two fundamental drivers for the electrification of mobility. And we are the second largest producer of battery materials in the world, with our operations producing cobalt. And for us, it's very important that those cobalt production is done as low emission as possible. And then we can track the emission from the mine down to the end customer, being that an electronics company or a renewable energy company or an automotive that runs on our materials in the battery. But we have learned that we can only do that by working collaborative along the value chain, and that's one of the reasons we've initiated together with the World Economic Forum the Global Battery Lines, which is a public-private collaboration platform that brings together just around 100 companies and organizations in the energy storage chain. And at the core of it is a so-called battery passport, which tracks emissions and ESG compliance of all the products that go into batteries. Because we cannot afford that the technologies of the 21st century are based on rules and behaviors of I don't know, the 17th or 18th century, particularly when it comes to child labor compliance, when it comes to ESG and corporate governance, but also, of course, CO2 emissions. And I think we're also very active in the World Economic Forum in the blockchain initiative, because we believe traceability of behavior and traceability of emissions is incredibly important, because the more people do that, the more difficult it will be for the ones that are not doing it, not to do it, because it will ultimately give customers a choice to choose between a product that's been produced with a carbon footprint of X or with a carbon footprint of X plus something. So we need to give customers a choice, because ultimately that will drive consumer behavior, and that will drive changes in corporate behavior, because that's where the profits are. I personally believe that the low carbon economy is the biggest purchase order in the history of the world. So there's tremendous opportunity for companies, whether that's raw materials companies like ourselves, or new service providers, new intelligence and data providers, for banks, financial services. We've just recently signed our first green energy facility with Sberbank last week at the St. Petersburg Forum for our African operations. We're very proud of that, which will have a direct impact on reducing emissions and waste. So I think it's a fantastic opportunity. We just have to grab it. That's the way I think corporations need to think about the low carbon economy.
Thank you, Benedict. And you touched on a couple of things that I think both Sberbank and CPIC also touched on, and that's the synergy between the focus on ESG and the business objectives. You can't do those separately. They need to be fully aligned. You talked about new technologies, so you know the cobalt and copper, of course, they will play an important role. But how those are extracted and produced, that's where the key difference lies. And of course, we've also talked in this forum before about the customers and investors. So both customers and investors will choose, you know, the best suppliers, and companies need to really step up to ensure that they remain competitive in this environment. Sylvia, any comments on that?
Yeah, I heard a few interesting things I want to build on. One thing about innovation, and we heard about the batteries and hydrogen. One very important thing that I'm seeing is, which is I think is new in the business community, is the ability to get alliances for innovation. So you see competitors, you see people across different sectors getting together to address innovation. For example, for hydrogen, you see transportation, energy players, manufacturers working together and trying to resolve. So I think that's an important aspect. The other aspect that Sid also mentioned was digitization and the artificial intelligence. This is also an aspect very important to drive the transition, because in order to really make the transition real, you have to be able to measure the emissions, to monitor how they evolve over time, to use different materials. And you can do this only with a very systematic digitization process. I've seen this in action in the gas distribution systems, and it's really amazing what you can do with a full digitization with the network. So those are two very important elements. That would be my 3 questions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sylvia, for your comment. So I'm going to actually throw out to the whole panel the notion of greenwashing, and the biggest sort of concern that investors might have is that companies just disclose whatever they're already doing well, and or just doing a tick box exercise. We have this committee, we have this report, and that's it. So how do we avoid that notion of greenwashing? How do we really ensure that companies not just talk the talk, but walk the walk? Maybe kick off with you, Sylvia, and maybe Alexander next. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a matter of reputation of the company. So that's something that the board really needs to watch very closely. And how do you do this? Well, certainly looking for the consistency between the strategy and what is communicated is very important, because as long as the parameters and the communication is consistent with what the strategy is, I think the risk of greenwashing is minimal. But clearly the board has to keep an eye on this, keep challenging. And again, the ability to have credible metrics, and that is fundamental in all this.
Alexander?
This is a really good question. It's always dangerous to start greenwashing, saying everything is green, everything is ESG, and so on. And when we have started, first of all, we have seen in somehow departments saying, okay, everything what we have done, it was actually it was ESG always. We have done always ESG and so on. It was not like this, but actually it was an intention, yes, to make everything green. So we have put a practice in Sberbank that we should see results, new results, because greenwashing could be about saying all what a person or what a company has done as a green. So it's not like this, but we have to talk about new results. Okay, this is a 0.0. Yes, from the 0.0, what you have done in terms of green and real green. I mean, there are there is a taxonomy, yes, and we have to understand that based on international taxonomy, is green or not green. That's sometimes not easy, but it's much better than just to listen to some talks. for the first of all. Second, a person, a board member should, as Sylvia said, should always be challenging to people reporting to the board. And it means that board members should be really hands-in and really love the agenda, the green agenda, be quite technical to understand is just greenwashing or not greenwashing. And by the way, for this, we have made an education for our board members, ESG education to improve level of our board members. And by the way, I see one of our board members here, this Alexander Kulishov, the Dean of Skoltech. So I see him as a participant. And it really helps us to have a good structured discussion on the board level on one hand side. On the other hand side, they board members now are asking really hard questions to us, and this is really good. So I think this is education, this is result-oriented KPIs and general culture, and will help us to avoid any greenwashing. Thank you.
Wonderful. Who would like to go next? Tarsila, would you like to say, or Mr. Fu, would you like to say any comments on that?
Yeah,
Mr. Fu, yes, go ahead. I think Mr. Fu, I think that's you. Yeah, okay. No?
好，谢谢。
Okay.
Anna 提了一个很好的这个问题啊，这个
You actually mentioned a very important issue, how to avoid box ticking and greenwashing. I agree with most of the panelists' strategy of norm setting, information disclosure, and third-party verification. I think there are two other aspects. One, we continue to optimize coordination with suppliers, helping them enhance climate governance capabilities. For granting them, we have very important international standards. As far as we can see, there are two categories of standards on the market. One is the market-driven green bond standards drafted by the international organization, the other being national standards. Currently, China has put in place a framework of 3 sets of norms, guidelines for a list of green industries, which was issued in 2019 by the NDRC, in tandem with 7 other central government policies. The EU also released the norms on classification of sustainable financing in June 2019. So yet to be ratified, though yet to be ratified by the European Parliament, the main concepts are essentially in place. That only China and the EU have explicit standards on classification of green sectors, and those have attracted the attention of the international community. Under sustainable financing, China and the EU are moving towards reconciliation of their standards to avoid fragmentation of the green financing market. And recently, the Shanghai Carbon Exchange also put in place its carbon trading standard. And now we also have other viable options, including enhanced information disclosure and use of independent verification. This ensures implementation of the carbon cap and trading system, and accurate data on emissions would guarantee the reliability and credibility of the system. Thank you.
Thank you. Tarsila?
No, just a quick note in respect to greenwashing. I also agree with my colleagues, and that we have, as board members, always keeping, the eye on this is about reputation, is about credibility. So, and also I believe that is also very bad for the credibility for the company, for its employees, from customers, consumers in the market. So we live in the era of transparency. So to avoid this, I think we have to raise the discussion at a strategic level to ensure a culture of transparency. So I always believe that it's better to walk than talk. And also ensuring that they are understanding the great risks and opportunities we have, the role of the capital markets, the new generation of consumers, and also innovation and technologies available as traceability, as Mr. Benedict also talked here. So I think this is the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Benedict, then Sylvia. So Benedict, just to refresh, the question is around how do we avoid greenwashing and box ticking when we talk about ESG and climate related disclosure?
Yeah, I guess Alexander, I think, has put it very, very accurately. This in corporations, I think I don't see that big of a risk, because there's a lot of risk for companies and the individuals to just lie about their carbon credentials. It will come out, and it will be very, very embarrassing. So I don't think it's really a corporate problem. It's much more a challenge for global supply chains. Because today, if you have a certain carbon intensity in a supply chain, it doesn't just go away because the individual companies report on CO2 emission reduction targets. What happens is the companies try to shrink their own scope, their own emissions, but they're actually pushing the emissions out into a more opaque part of the supply chain. This is exactly what happened with some of the metals and mining industry. When companies start to dispose of their carbon emission segments, and they end up in organizations and companies that are much less exposed to regulatory requirements and much less exposed to public scrutiny. So you're creating a clean and white corporate sector, while at the same time you're creating a gray sector, which is not the intention, because the carbon emissions don't get reduced, they just get shifted to other organizations, they just get shifted to other geographies. And that's why it's important that you have an end-to-end traceability of emissions, you have an end-to-end traceability, and you see actually where the circularity is where do products come in, because still the lowest carbon economy, the lowest carbon emission products are the ones that are circular, the ones that are being recycled. And that's something that I think most companies don't put enough focus on. Coming back to the corporations, they only look at what they produce today, right? But if you look at the whole life cycle of a product and the recyclability of products, at the moment, most products are not designed to be recycled, whether that's mobile phones or automotive or other major carbon emitting products. They're not designed to be recycled.
Or even electric vehicles, right? Electric cars.
Yeah, electric vehicles. So batteries is a perfect example in the global battery lines. That's one of the things we struggle with, is there's no consistent standard for batteries. So if at the end of the life cycle of a car, which may be after 10 or 15 years, you don't know how much power is left in the battery, because the chemistry is all different. So how do you recycle something or second use something where you don't have data that tells you how much actually this metal is in that product? Where does it come from? How can it be recycled? Is there a second life to the battery, and how much? So it's a real challenge which we're trying to address exactly with the battery passport, is to show at the end of the life cycle of a battery, this is how much is left. This is how you can reuse it. This is the CO2 emission footprint, because at the moment we're producing millions and millions of electric cars, and it's going to grow even more without actually knowing how those will be used again.
Thank you, Sylvia.
I totally agree. I think the issue of the supply chain and the whole business model is really critical here, because you don't control necessarily the entire supply chain. And it's important to be able to measure the emission at level 3, but actually it's extremely hard to do it. So that's the challenge that everybody needs to take care of. And I do believe that is a matter of linking the targets with the company with the metrics you can measure, but also expanding and influencing the entire supply chain around you, so that this can control the situation a little bit better. But this also implies changing the business model. I mean, some companies need to really change the way they work. with suppliers, with customers, with distribution channel. And that's, I think, is the most difficult part of climate change. And it's something where the board has limited visibility and limited impact, but still can raise questions, you know, and still can force the dialogue with the management team and trying to make sure that this happens. Yeah.
Thank you very much, all. And just to summarize the views from the panel, what's important, educating the executive board, the non-executive board, the setting real targets that are aligned with the business, looking not just at the business and what it does, but actually the suppliers, and ensuring, you know, that there is accountability across the whole supply chain. And we have seen these examples with some of the technology, or for example, clothes retail companies that actually have some you know, sometimes have some very obscure sources of the components or their products. So that's really important. We're talking about alignment with the government strategies and actually being held accountable by customers and by investors to ensure that the companies not just report on good behavior, but actually exemplify the good behavior throughout the whole value chain. So I think we have one question from the audience, but it does seem like well, I'll ask the question, and maybe we have just 1 or 2 minutes left. So maybe Sylvia or Tarsila might want to attack that one. So what role do investors and capital markets stand to play in encouraging more boards to rise to the occasion? So the role of investors and capital markets, Sylvia.
Yeah, I'll take this one because I think investors and the capital markets is the single biggest driver in all this transformation, because investors are becoming extremely detailed in checking what company report, but also in challenging it. And they make investment decisions based on what they understand and what they hear. So the engagement with shareholders is important, with investors, and this impacts banks, fund managers, you know, stakeholder investors. So any company who raise money in the market, however they do it, needs to take this as a serious challenge and address it immediately. So I actually think this is the most important driver and catalyst to make it happen.
Tarsila, anything from you?
I completely agree with Sylvia. I think it's a great catalyst right now, and they are understanding also increasing the understanding of the importance of reviewing new pricing of assets, climate governance, requirement also for credit. So there's also a lot of opportunities to issue bonds and sustainability linked loan. So I think it's the great challenge right now and a great catalyst as well. It's a great opportunity also.
Thanks. And I mentioned earlier the transition bonds, for example, which some of the companies in so-called brown industries can utilize to enable them to get on that journey towards less carbon intensive future. So I would like to thank all of our brilliant panelists. I would like to thank you all for your immensely valuable insights and your international outlook. And it's really encouraging to hear how amazing you have been in really putting yourself forward in terms of, updating the ESG and climate-related strategy for the boards, executive boards, non-executive boards, and how open you have been in terms of sharing your advice and your know-how with the audience today. So with that, I'd like to thank you again and hand over to Yelena to finish off the
Thank you very much. That was an incredible discussion. We are very happy to host it. And yes, it's very encouraging to see that over recent years, we actually transformed from talking the talk to walking the walk, and it's very encouraging. And what is amazing that the velocity and the pace and the depth of the climate governance concern is only raising, and we are very happy we are part of this initiative, and we see that Russia is among the leaders, actually, given the specifics of its economy, and we think and we believe that the board of directors are playing the most important strategic and encouraging role. So thank you once again. Thank you, Ayuna, for such wonderful moderation. Thank you to all of our speakers. We will continue developing our events, and if you have any questions, if you would like to continue this discussion, please feel free to send us an email or contact us. Otherwise, we are here, we are available, and we are part of the global climate initiatives guided by the World Economic Forum. Thank you very much for this event.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.